Nearly 4,000 years ago, in the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, a king erected a monumental stone pillar, a stele of black diorite standing over 7 feet tall. This wasn't just a work of art, it was a decoration, a legal revolution that would echo through millennia. This is the story of the Code of Hammurabi. Welcome, history lovers. Today, we're traveling back to the 18th century BCE, to the mighty Babylonian Empire under the rule of its sixth king, Hammurabi. When Hammurabi ascended to the throne, Babylon was just one of many city-states in the region, but through shrewd diplomacy and relentless military campaigns, he forged a vast empire, uniting Mesopotamia under his singular rule. With this new, sprawling kingdom came a new challenge: how to govern a diverse population with varying customs and traditions. Hammurabi's answer was bold and unprecedented. He sought to create a single, unified legal framework for all his subjects, from the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates to the furthest reaches of his domain. The goal, as stated in the prologue of the code itself, was to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak. Discovered in 1901 by a team of French archaeologists in modern-day Iran, the Stele of Hammurabi is a breathtaking sight. At its very top, a detailed carving depicts Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice. Shamash is shown seated, handing Hammurabi a ring and a rod, symbols of divine authority and power to administer law. This imagery was a powerful piece of political propaganda. It sent a clear message: these laws were not merely the whims of a mortal king, they were divinely inspired, immutable, and absolute. The rest of the stele is covered in meticulously carved cuneiform script, one of the earliest forms of writing, detailing 282 specific laws. These laws weren't a random collection of rules. They were systematically organized, covering a vast range of social and economic life in Babylon. They addressed everything from contracts, property rights, and trade disputes to family law, including marriage, divorce, and inheritance. The code also laid out penalties for assault, theft, and professional malpractice. It was a comprehensive legal manual for its time. Now, let us talk about the principle that made the Code of Hammurabi famous: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This concept, known as lex talionis or the law of retaliation, appears in several of the Code's laws. For example, Law 196 states, "If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out." Law 200 says, "If a man knock out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out." On the surface, this seems incredibly harsh to our modern sensibilities. However, in the context of its time, it was a significant step forward. Before this, justice was often a matter of personal vengeance or blood feuds, where a minor slight could escalate into a cycle of violence spanning generations. By institutionalizing punishment and making it proportional to the crime, Hammurabi's code aimed to limit retribution and bring disputes under the control of the state. It was an attempt to replace chaos with order. But the code was far from egalitarian. Justice in Babylon was heavily dependent on your social status. The laws distinguished between 3 main classes: the Willem or the upper class of nobles, and property owners, the Mushkenem or the commoners, and free people of lower status, and the wardem or slaves. The eye for an eye principle often only applied when the victim and perpetrator were of the same social class. For instance, if a nobleman injured a commoner, the penalty was typically a monetary fine rather than physical retaliation. And if a nobleman injured a slave, the fine was even smaller, often paid to the slave's owner for the loss of property. This hierarchy is a stark reminder that while the code sought justice, it also reinforced the rigid social structure of Babylonian society. Women's rights were also complex. While the code offered women certain protections in marriage and property ownership, their lives were largely controlled by their fathers and husbands. So, what kind of specific laws are in the code? Let's look at a few fascinating examples that paint a picture of daily life in Babylon. Law 229 dealt with construction. These laws reveal a sophisticated society concerned with commerce, liability, and the smooth functioning of its economy. The legacy of the Code of Hammurabi is immense. It was at the very first law code in history. The Code of Hammurabi predates it by a few centuries, but it was by far the most complete and influential of its time. Its principles reverberated through subsequent legal traditions. Many scholars see parallels between Hammurabi's laws and the laws found in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the book of Exodus. The concept of state-administered justice, the idea that laws should be written down and publicly displayed, and the principle of proportional punishment all had a profound impact on the development of legal systems across the world. The stele itself was a powerful symbol. By inscribing the laws on a public monument for all to see, at least for all who could read, Hammurabi established the principle that the law is a public, knowable standard to which even the king is subject. It was a foundational step toward the concept of the rule of law. Today, the original stele of Hammurabi is one of the star attractions at the Louvre Museum in Paris, where millions of visitors gaze upon it every year. It's a story written in stone, a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of law and civilization. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from our incredible past. Let us know in the comments which historical topic you'd like us to explore next. See you in the next video. Step back in time almost 4,000 years ago to the ancient lands of Mesopotamia. This is the story of a king who turned a modest city-state into a sprawling empire. A ruler whose name has echoed through millennia, Hammurabi of Babylon. His reign from around 1792 to 1750 BCE wasn't just about conquest, it was about creation, the creation of a unified state, a centralized government, and one of the most famous legal codes in human history. When Hammurabi first ascended the throne, Mesopotamia was a patchwork of competing powers. City-states like Larsa, Mari, and Eshnunna were constantly vying for control over fertile lands and vital trade routes. It was a world of shifting alliances and frequent conflict. Babylon, at the time, was just one player among many. But Hammurabi had a vision that went far beyond the walls of his city. He was a master of both war and diplomacy. Through a series of shrewd military campaigns, he began to expand Babylon's influence, one city-state at a time. But he didn't rely on force alone. He forged strategic alliances, playing his rivals against one another until the moment was right to bring them under his control. Gradually, he unified the fragmented lands of southern Mesopotamia, creating an empire that stretched along the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This new empire was rich in resources, but it also presented a monumental challenge. How do you govern such a diverse and sprawling population? This is where Hammurabi's genius truly shines. To consolidate his power and legitimize his rule, he declared that his authority came directly from the gods. Specifically, he was chosen by Shamash, the sun god, who was also the god of justice. This wasn't just a political statement, It was a profound religious claim. According to the prologue of his famous legal code, the laws themselves were handed to him by Shamash. This positioned Hammurabi not just as a king, but as a divine lawgiver, an intermediary between the heavens and the earth. This divine connection is immortalized in stone, on the top of the famous basalt stele where his laws are inscribed. There's a stunning relief carving. It shows Hammurabi standing before the enthroned god Shamash, receiving the symbols of law and justice. This powerful image was a form of ancient propaganda, a visual message to everyone in the empire that these weren't just Hammurabi's laws, they were the laws of the gods, and they were sacred. So, what were these laws? The Code of Hammurabi is one of the oldest and most complete legal texts ever discovered. Inscribed in the Akkadian language using cuneiform script, it contains 282 laws that cover almost every aspect of daily life. It's a comprehensive blueprint for a complex society, addressing everything from property disputes and business contracts to marriage, divorce, and inheritance. It also dealt with crimes like theft and assault, prescribing specific penalties for specific offenses. The code reveals a lot about the structure of Babylonian society, which was distinctly hierarchical. The penalties for a crime often depended on the social status of the people involved. There were three main classes: the Awilim or free landowning elites, the Mushkenim, or commoners and dependents of the state, and the Wardem or slaves. For example, if a doctor's patient from the upper class died during an operation, the doctor's hands might be cut off. But if the patient was a slave, the doctor would only have to replace the slave with one of equal value. This eye for an eye principle, known as lex talionis, is one of the most famous aspects of the code, but it was applied differently across social lines. Beyond simply punishing crime, the code had a much broader purpose. By creating a standardized set of laws for the entire empire, Hammurabi replaced the patchwork of local customs that had existed before. This brought consistency and predictability to the justice system. It helped regulate trade, protect property, and resolve disputes in a fair, or at least predictable, manner. For the officials and judges across his vast territory, the code served as a definitive reference guide, reducing the chance of arbitrary or corrupt rulings. It was a powerful tool for social control and for reinforcing the king's authority. To support this centralized state, Hammurabi was also a prolific builder. He invested heavily in infrastructure, overseeing the construction of massive city walls, grand temples, and intricate canal systems for irrigation. These projects didn't just improve life for his people. They showcased the power and prosperity of Babylon, cementing its status as the heart of the empire. A complex bureaucracy of scribes and officials managed everything from tax collection to labor allocation, ensuring the smooth operation of Hammurabi's government. Hammurabi's model of kingship, blending military might, divine right, and legal order, set a powerful precedent that would influence rulers in the Near East for centuries to come. His focus on establishing justice, even if it was a justice that reflected the inequalities of his time, was a landmark step in the development of law and governance. Despite his monumental achievements, the personal life of Hammurabi remains a mystery. We know him primarily through his public inscriptions and administrative texts. He is the king, the conqueror, the lawgiver, but the man behind the titles is lost to history. The famous stele containing his code didn't even stay in Babylon forever. Around the 12th century BCE, it was seized as war booty by invaders from Elam and carried off to their capital, Susa, in modern-day Iran. There it lay buried and forgotten for over 3,000 years, until a team of French archaeologists rediscovered it in 1901. Today, this incredible artifact resides in the Louvre Museum in Paris, a direct link to the world of ancient Babylon and the enduring legacy of its greatest king. Hammurabi's reign was a defining moment in history. He took a fragmented land and forged an empire not just with swords, but with laws. His code, a testament to his ambition and vision, provides an unparalleled window into the justice, society, and governance of one of the world's first great civilizations. It's not just a dusty old relic, it's a fascinating window into the dawn of civilization, justice, and what it meant to build a society from the ground up. So, who was Hammurabi? Around 1792 BC, he became the sixth king of Babylon. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a brilliant administrator. Imagine inheriting a small city-state and, through decades of diplomacy and military campaigns, forging it into a massive empire that controlled all of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. But ruling a vast, diverse empire came with a huge challenge. How do you keep everyone on the same page? How do you ensure fairness and order from one end of your kingdom to the other? Hammurabi's answer was his code of laws. Now, what exactly is this code? Picture this: a massive stone pillar, a stele nearly 7.5 feet tall, made of black diorite. Carved at the very top is an image of Hammurabi himself, standing before Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice. Shamash is seated, handing Hammurabi the symbols of royal authority, a rod and a ring. This carving wasn't just decoration, it was a powerful statement. It told everyone that these laws weren't just Hammurabi's ideas, they were divinely inspired, given to him by the god of justice itself. Below this incredible artwork, inscribed in the ancient cuneiform script, are 282 laws. These weren't the first laws ever written, but they are the best preserved and most famous from this early period. They were publicly displayed on these steles, placed in temples and city centers throughout the empire, so that anyone who could read or have it read to them would know the rules. It was a revolutionary concept, justice that was visible, permanent, and accessible to all, at least in theory. So, what kind of laws are in the code? They cover an astonishing range of topics, giving us a detailed snapshot of Babylonian life. There are laws about contracts, trade, and property. For example, if you hired a worker, the code specified how much you had to pay them. If you rented an ox and it died through neglect, you had to compensate the owner. These rules helped grease the wheels of a complex economy, ensuring that business transactions were predictable and fair. The code also delves deep into family life. It covers marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption. For instance, a woman's dowry was legally protected. If her husband divorced her without good cause, he had to return it. On the other hand, if a wife was found to be neglectful of her home or belittled her husband, the law stated he could divorce her without penalty or even demote her to the status of a servant in his own household. It shows a society that was clearly patriarchal, but one where women still had certain recognized rights and protections under the law. But of course, the part of the code that everyone remembers is the criminal law, famous for its principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This concept, known as lex talionis or retributive justice, is spelled out quite literally. Law 196 says, "If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out." Law 200 states, "If a man knock out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out." It sounds harsh to us today, but at the time, it was a step forward. It limited retaliation. Instead of a family feud escalating into endless cycles of revenge, the punishment was meant to fit the crime, and the state, not individuals, was in charge of administering it, however. And this is a crucial point. Justice in Hammurabi's Babylon was not blind. The eye for an eye principle mostly applied when the victim and the perpetrator were of the same social class. Society was divided into three main groups: the Awilim, or the upper class of nobles and property owners, the Mushkinim, or commoners, and the wardem, or slaves. The law treated them very differently. For example, if a nobleman blinded the eye of a commoner, he wouldn't lose his own eye. Instead, he would pay a fine, usually 1 mina of silver. And if he blinded the eye of a slave, the penalty was even less. He'd just have to pay half of the slave's value to the owner. This shows us that while the code aimed for order, it also reinforced the existing social hierarchy. Your status determined your rights and the punishments you might face. It was a system of justice, but it was far from a system of equality. Let's look at some other specific examples that reveal the values of this ancient society. The code is obsessed with false accusations. From the very first law states that if a man accuses another of a serious crime but can't prove it, the accuser will be put to death. This tells us how seriously they took reputation and the danger of slander. They also had a method called the river ordeal. If you were accused of something like sorcery, and there was no evidence, you could be thrown into the Euphrates River. If the river took you, meaning you drowned, you were considered guilty. If you survived, you were innocent, and your accuser would be put to death, and his property given to you. It was their version of a divine lie detector test. The code also placed a huge emphasis on professional responsibility. A doctor who performed a successful surgery was entitled to a specific fee, again, based on the patient's social class. But if the doctor's patient died, or if they blinded the patient during an eye surgery, the consequences were severe. For a noble patient, the doctor's hands could be cut off. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about ensuring that people with critical skills performed their jobs with the utmost care. The same logic applied to builders. If a house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder was put to death. If it killed the owner's son, the builder's son was put to death. It's a brutal logic, but it shows a deep-seated demand for accountability. So, what is the legacy of Hammurabi's code? For centuries, it was lost to history. The original stele we know today was actually looted from Babylon and taken to the city of Susa in modern-day Iran. It lay buried there until it was rediscovered by French archaeologists in 1901. Its discovery was a sensation. Here was a complete legal system, far older than the laws of Moses or the ancient Greeks, that was incredibly sophisticated. Its influence is debated among historians, but its principles echo through the ages. The idea of a written public code of laws, the concept of the state being the ultimate arbiter of justice, the principle that the punishment should fit the crime. These are foundational concepts in many legal systems that followed, including Roman law and eventually modern Western law. Even though we've moved away from an eye for an eye, the underlying idea of proportionality and justice remains. The Code of Hammurabi isn't just a list of ancient rules. It's a testament to a ruler's ambition to create a stable, orderly society. It's a complex document that is both progressive for its time and deeply unequal. It reveals a world where divine authority, social class, and personal responsibility were woven into the very fabric of the law. By studying it, we don't just learn about ancient Babylon, we learn about the long, complicated, and ongoing human struggle to define justice and build a better world. It is a powerful reminder that our own legal systems are part of a story that began thousands of years ago on a stone pillar in the heart of Mesopotamia. Have you ever wondered where our laws come from? Why we have courts, contracts, and punishments for crimes? A huge piece of that puzzle lies nearly 4,000 years in the past, etched into a massive stone pillar. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most important legal documents in human history, the Code of Hammurabi. Let's travel back to ancient Mesopotamia, around 1754 BC. The Babylonian Empire is at its peak under its sixth king, Hammurabi. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was a brilliant administrator, who wanted to unify his diverse kingdom. His solution: a single, comprehensive set of laws for everyone to follow. The result was a stunning 7.5-foot tall black basalt stele covered in intricate cuneiform script. At the very top, there's a carving of Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice. This image alone sends a powerful message. These aren't just Hammurabi's rules, they are divinely ordained. Discovered in 1901, this artifact gave us an unprecedented window into Babylonian society. It contains 282 laws, though some are now lost to time and damage. What's fascinating is how they're written. This isn't a list of abstract principles like "thou shalt not steal." Instead, it uses a case law format. If a man does X, then Y will happen to him. For example, Law 196 famously states, "If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out." This approach makes the law incredibly practical and easy to understand for the people of the time. It's like a giant fact for justice in ancient Babylon. Now, let's talk about that famous principle: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is known as lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. It might sound brutal to us today, but at the time, it was a major step forward. Before Hammurabi, justice was often a matter of personal vengeance or blood feuds that could spiral out of control for generations. By making the state the arbiter of punishment and ensuring the punishment fit the crime, the Code of Hammurabi introduced a sense of proportion and prevented endless cycles of revenge. It was a way to cap the violence. However, justice in Babylon was far from equal. The Code of Hammurabi very clearly reflects a rigid social hierarchy. Society was divided into three main classes: the Awilim, who were the upper-class, property-owning citizens; the Mushkenim, a class of free but lower-status commoners; and the Wardem, or slaves. The law applied differently depending on your social standing. Let's go back to that eye for an eye law. If a nobleman put out the eye of another nobleman, his own eye would be put out. Fair enough. But what if that same nobleman put out the eye of a commoner, a mushkenim? The penalty wasn't losing an eye, it was a fine of 1 mina of silver. And if he put out the eye of a slave, the fine was even less half the slave's value. This shows us that while the law aimed for order, it was also designed to reinforce the existing social structure. The life and limb of a nobleman were simply worth more than those of a commoner or a slave. The same went for medical malpractice. A doctor who successfully operated on a nobleman got a handsome reward. But if the nobleman died from the operation, the doctor's hands would be cut off. If a slave died, the doctor just had to replace the slave. But the code wasn't just about crime and punishment. A huge portion of it deals with civil matters, which tells us a lot about the daily life and economy of Babylon. There were laws governing contracts, wages, inheritance, and property disputes. For instance, it set the daily wage for a field laborer and for different types of artisans. It had detailed rules for marriage, divorce, and adoption. If a man wanted to divorce his wife, he had to return her dowry. If a woman was found to be a bad wife who neglected her home, the law allowed her husband to demote her to a servant, but he couldn't just cast her out. These laws paint a picture of a complex, urban society built on agriculture and trade. They regulated everything from the liability of a builder whose house collapses and kills the owner. The builder himself would be put to death, to what happens if your rented ox is killed by a lion. Spoiler: it's considered an act of God, and the renter isn't liable. These rules provided stability and predictability, which are essential for any economy to thrive. People knew their rights and obligations, which made doing business much safer. So, was the Code of Hammurabi a genuine attempt at justice, or something else? Many historians argue it was also a brilliant piece of political propaganda. Remember that carving at the top of the stele. By positioning himself as the recipient of divine law, Hammurabi wasn't just a king, he was the shepherd of the people, a righteous ruler chosen by the gods to bring justice to the land. Copies of the code were placed in public spaces across the empire, ensuring everyone knew that Hammurabi was the guarantor of order and prosperity. The prologue and epilogue of the code are pure political poetry. Hammurabi boasts about his military victories, his piety, and his desire to make justice prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, that the strong might not oppress the weak. It was a public declaration of his legitimacy and his vision for the empire. It told his subjects, and any potential rivals, that his rule was just, divinely sanctioned, and absolute. So, what is the lasting legacy of the Code of Hammurabi? It's immense. While it wasn't the very first law code in history, the Code of Hammurabi is older. It was, by far, the most comprehensive and influential of its time. Its principles echoed through the ancient world. You can see traces of its eye for an eye philosophy in the laws of the Hebrew Bible, specifically in the book of Exodus. The idea that a government is responsible for establishing a public, written legal system is a cornerstone of civilization that we owe, in part, to Hammurabi. The concept that laws should be public, that there should be a presumption of innocence, and that evidence is required to prove a case. All of these foundational ideas are present in the code. For example, the very first laws deal with false accusations. If you accused someone of a capital crime but couldn't prove it, you would be put to death. This was a powerful deterrent against bearing false witness. Of course, we've come a long way. Our modern legal systems are built on the principle of equality before the law. Something absent in Hammurabi's class-based justice. We no longer practice the brutal physical punishments prescribed in the code, but the fundamental idea that a society needs clear, written rules to function, to resolve disputes peacefully, and to protect its citizens is a direct intellectual descendant of the world Hammurabi created. The Code of Hammurabi isn't just a list of ancient rules. It's a snapshot of a civilization, a masterpiece of political marketing, and a foundational document in the long, ongoing story of human justice. It reminds us that our quest for a fair and orderly society is thousands of years old. The next time you hear about a contract dispute or a new law being passed, remember that black stone pillar from ancient Babylon. The shadow it casts is longer than you might think.
Around 1750 for year BC, the Code of Hammurabi was inscribed on a basalt stele to provide a comprehensive set of laws addressing the social, economic, and legal complexities of Babylonian society. The code covers a wide array of legal domains, reflecting the priorities of a civilization determined to maintain order and regulate interactions within a clearly defined social hierarchy. The laws touch upon property rights, family relationships, contracts, inheritance, and professional responsibilities. Each category reveals not only the legal framework but also the social values and structures inherent in mid-18th century year BC Babylon. One of the foremost concerns of the code is the regulation and protection of property. In ancient Babylon, land ownership, livestock, and goods were crucial to economic prosperity and social status. The code contains numerous laws that protect ownership rights and provide mechanisms for resolving disputes. If a person unlawfully seizes or damages another's property, the laws mandate compensation or restitution, aiming to discourage theft and safeguard economic stability. These provisions help minimize conflict by establishing predictable consequences for property violations. Moreover, the code regulates the relationships between landlords and tenants, rent agreements, responsibilities for maintaining leased property, and remedies in cases of neglect or damage are explicitly defined. For example, tenants are obligated to care for the land or buildings they lease, while landlords must uphold their duties by providing access or ensuring the property is suitable for use. Such regulations demonstrate a sophisticated approach to land tenure and economic relations, emphasizing contractual obligations enforceable by law. This framework contributed to the orderly conduct of agriculture and commerce, two pillars of Babylonian life. Commercial transactions and contracts form another key theme within the code. Trade was a significant aspect of Babylon's economy, involving merchants, craftsmen, and traders operating within and beyond the empire's borders. The laws specify requirements for loan agreements, sales, and partnerships, emphasizing honesty and clarity in commercial dealings. Penalties for fraud, breach of contract, or failure to meet obligations were clearly stated to promote trust and reduce disputes. For example, a merchant who defaults on a contract may be required to repay the creditor with additional compensation, reinforcing accountability. Loan agreements, a common feature of Babylonian commerce, receive particular attention. The code outlines the permissible interest rates and collateral arrangements to protect both lenders and borrowers. These regulations balance the economic need for credit with safeguards against exploitation. The presence of detailed loan laws reflects the importance of credit in Babylon's economy and the legal system's role in facilitating financial transactions. Family law constitutes a substantial portion of the code, addressing marriage, divorce, and inheritance. Marriage contracts were formalized agreements documented by scribes, detailing the obligations and rights of both husband and wife. The code includes laws protecting a wife's property rights and provisions governing divorce. For instance, if a husband divorces his wife without cause, he must return her dowry and provide financial support. Adultery is also regulated, with penalties varying based on social status and circumstances, illustrating the importance of family integrity and social norms concerning fidelity. Inheritance laws within the code primarily focus on the transfer of property to male heirs but also recognize daughters' rights in specific cases. These rules aim to maintain family wealth and ensure continuity of property within the lineage. In cases where a man died without sons, daughters could inherit property under defined conditions. The legal clarity provided by these laws prevented disputes among heirs and preserved social stability by reinforcing familial structures. Another significant legal area concerns professional responsibility and liability. The code holds individuals accountable for their work, requiring high standards in craftsmanship and service. Builders, for example, were responsible for the quality of their construction. If a house collapsed due to negligence and caused injury or death, the builder faced severe penalties, including financial restitution or personal punishment. This focus on accountability ensured public safety and maintained confidence in professional services. Physicians and merchants were subject to similar regulations. Physicians had to meet professional standards, with penalties prescribed for malpractice or negligence. Merchants who violated trading agreements or defrauded customers faced legal consequences. These laws underscore the importance placed on trust and responsibility within economic and social activities, contributing to the orderly functioning of Babylonian society, a principle frequently associated with Hammurabi's code is lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, commonly paraphrased as an eye for an eye. While this principle does appear, it is applied selectively and within a broader legal context that prioritizes proportionality and restitution. The code distinguishes between cases where physical punishment is appropriate and those where monetary compensation or other penalties are warranted. For instance, when individuals of equal social rank are involved, an injury might result in an equivalent physical punishment. However, when the parties differ in social status, the penalties adjust accordingly, sometimes favoring financial restitution over corporeal harm. This differentiation reflects the social stratification inherent in Babylonian law and the practical considerations of maintaining order without excessive violence. The emphasis on restitution over revenge in many instances highlights the code's objective to restore balance, rather than perpetuate cycles of violence. By requiring offenders to compensate victims or their families, the law sought to repair social harmony and deter further conflict. This approach contributed to the stability of the society by providing established predictable means for resolving disputes. The code also encompasses laws related to public order and administrative responsibility. Theft, false accusations, and the duties of public officials are regulated with penalties varying according to the offense's severity and the individuals involved. For example, judges who delivered false verdicts faced punishment, reflecting the importance of justice administration within the governance framework. These regulations reveal the comprehensive scope of the code, far from being limited to criminal law. The code addressed civil, commercial, family, and administrative matters, providing a structured legal framework to govern diverse aspects of Babylonian life. This breadth demonstrates the administrative sophistication and the ambition of Hammurabi's government to unify and control a complex society through law. Furthermore, the laws reflect the values and priorities of mid-18th century year BC Babylonian society. Protecting property, regulating family relations, ensuring fairness within social ranks, and maintaining public order were central concerns. The code sought to create a predictable legal environment in which individuals understood their rights and obligations. Through these detailed provisions, the Code of Hammurabi offers a revealing glimpse into the legal mind and social organization of one of history's earliest empires. It demonstrates how law functioned as a means to manage conflict, uphold social hierarchies, and promote economic and social stability. These legal themes continue to inform the study of ancient civilizations and the development of legal systems worldwide. Around 1750 for year BC, the Code of Hammurabi regulated not only laws concerning property, contracts, and family but also laws related to social distinctions, particularly focusing on women, slaves, and the complex social hierarchy of Babylonian society. This segment explores the conditional nature of justice as it applied to different groups, reflecting a legal system embedded in social stratification and cultural norms. Babylonian society in Hammurabi's time was sharply divided along lines of class and status. Three primary social categories appear in the code: the ovlum, often translated as free men or elites; the makenim, dependent or semi-free individuals with limited rights; and the wardum, meaning slaves. Each category held distinct legal rights and obligations, and the code explicitly differentiates the treatment of individuals depending on their social standing. Women's status within this social framework was complex and conditional. The code grants women certain legal protections but also places limitations on their rights, reflecting the cultural context of patriarchal Babylonian society. Women's roles were primarily connected to the household, marriage, and family lineage, yet they held property rights under specific conditions and could engage in legal contracts. Marriage law constitutes a significant portion of the code's regulation concerning women. Marriages were formal agreements, often accompanied by dowries and documented contracts, defining the rights and responsibilities of husband and wife. The code sets out laws concerning the dissolution of marriage, protecting women to some extent by requiring the return of dowries and, in some cases, financial support after divorce. Divorce itself is regulated with attention to cause and consequence. If a husband divorces his wife without just cause, he must return her dowry and provide for her livelihood. However, if a wife is found guilty of adultery, the code prescribes severe punishments, illustrating social expectations about fidelity and the protection of family honor. Such laws reveal a society intent on maintaining social order through family structures, but within a framework that favored male authority. Women could own property and manage their dowries independently, giving them a measure of economic agency in common in many contemporary societies. Widows, in particular, had legal standing to inherit and manage property, indicating a recognition of women's role in property transmission within families. Nonetheless, these rights were circumscribed by social conventions and legal provisions that reinforced male dominance. The code also details protections for women in cases of abuse or abandonment. For example, if a man neglects to provide for his wife or fails to support her adequately, the law grants her the right to seek redress. These protections, while limited, illustrate a legal recognition of women's vulnerability and a mechanism to uphold their security. Within the patriarchal system, slavery, represented by the wardom class, formed a distinct legal category with its own regulations. Slaves in Babylon were considered property, but were also subject to legal protections under the code. Laws stipulated the treatment of slaves, rules for manumission, and penalties for abuse. For instance, if a slave was harmed or killed unlawfully, the code required compensation to the owner, emphasizing the property status of slaves while recognizing some legal boundaries on owners' conduct. The legal status of slaves also varied depending on origin and circumstance. Some were war captives, others were debt slaves, and some entered servitude voluntarily. The code's provisions reflect this complexity by regulating transactions involving slaves, including their sale, inheritance, and conditions for freedom. Importantly, the code recognizes the humanity of slaves to an extent by prescribing penalties for mistreatment and providing avenues for slaves to gain freedom. However, slaves' legal rights were clearly limited compared to free men, reflecting the entrenched social hierarchy of Babylonian society. Social class distinctions also influenced the application of justice throughout the code. Laws differentiated penalties and procedures based on an individual's social status. For example, the consequences of harming a person of higher status were more severe than those for injuring a person of lower rank. This tiered system of justice reinforced social stratification and maintained order by protecting elites while controlling lower classes. The wardom class, comprising nobles, landowners, and high-ranking officials, enjoyed privileges under the law. They could own property, participate fully in legal contracts, and benefit from more favorable penalties in disputes. The millennium, often dependent laborers or semi-free individuals, had restricted legal rights and were subject to harsher penalties. This distinction is apparent in many laws that specify different compensations or punishments depending on the social rank of the parties involved. This legal stratification extended to criminal law as well. Theft, assault, and other offenses were punished with varying severity based on the victim's and perpetrator's social class. The code's language carefully delineates these differences, illustrating how law functioned as a tool for preserving social hierarchy and political control. Despite these distinctions, the code's regulations aim to provide some measure of order and predictability across classes by clearly defining legal rights and duties. The code sought to regulate interactions between social groups and minimize conflicts that could disrupt the stability of Babylonian society. The conditional nature of justice in Hammurabi's code reflects the realities of a society organized around rigid social structures. Legal protections were extended, but always within the constraints of status and role. This system balanced authority and control, with limited protections for vulnerable groups, illustrating the intricate interplay of law, society, and power in ancient Babylon. In summary, the Code of Hammurabi presents a legal system deeply embedded in social hierarchy. Women, slaves, and different social classes experience justice differently, shaped by their status and role within the community. The laws granted protections and rights but also enforced distinctions that maintain the structure of Babylonian society in 1754 BC. Have you ever wondered where our laws come from? Why do we have rules about contracts, property, and even family disputes? A huge part of the answer lies thousands of years in the past, etched onto a single, imposing stone pillar. Today, we're journeying back to ancient Mesopotamia to uncover the enduring legacy of one of the most important legal documents in human history, the Code of Hammurabi. So, what exactly is this code? Around 1754 BC, Hammurabi, the sixth king of the first Babylonian dynasty, decided to compile a set of laws to govern his vast empire. This wasn't just a random list of rules, it was a comprehensive legal framework covering everything from commercial transactions and family law to criminal justice and administrative regulations. The code was inscribed on a massive black diorite stele, over 7 feet tall, and placed in a public area for all to see. At the very top, there's a famous carving of Hammurabi himself, receiving the laws from Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice. This image sent a powerful message. These laws weren't just the king's ideas, they were divinely ordained, absolute, and unchangeable. The code consists of 282 laws, each written in a conditional if-then format. For example, if a man has stolen an ox, he shall pay 30-fold. This structure made the laws clear and the consequences specific. Now, many people have heard of the most famous principle from the code, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This concept, known as lex talionis or the law of retribution, seems harsh to us today. And it was. If you caused someone to lose an eye, your eye would be taken in return. However, it's crucial to understand the context. Before Hammurabi, justice was often a matter of personal revenge, leading to endless blood feuds between families. The eye for an eye principle, while severe, was actually a step toward limiting that vengeance. It established that the punishment should fit the crime, and no more. It was a move from chaotic personal revenge to state-administered justice. But the Code of Hammurabi was far more than just an eye for an eye. It introduced several groundbreaking legal principles that we still recognize today. One of the most significant is the presumption of innocence. The code required accusers to provide evidence. Law 1, for example, states that if a man accuses another of a capital crime but cannot prove it, the accuser himself shall be put to death. This placed a heavy burden of proof on the accuser and protected individuals from false accusations. Imagine the impact of that. For the first time in recorded history, you were considered innocent until proven guilty. The code also differentiated punishments based on social status. A crime committed against a nobleman would result in a harsher penalty than the same crime committed against a commoner or a slave. For instance, if a doctor's patient, a nobleman, died during surgery, the doctor's hands would be cut off. But if the patient was a slave, the doctor only had to replace the slave. This is obviously unfair by our modern standards of equality, but it gives us a fascinating and filtered look into the rigid social hierarchy of Babylonian society. It tells us that justice, even when written in stone, was not blind. Let's talk about its influence. Did Hammurabi's code directly shape the laws of Greece, Rome, and eventually, modern Western legal systems? The answer is complex. There isn't a straight and broken line connecting them. However, the ideas behind the code spread far and wide. The concept of a written, public legal code became a cornerstone for future civilizations. When later lawgivers, like Moses in the Hebrew Bible, set down their laws, they were working within a tradition that Hammurabi had helped to establish. Many scholars see parallels between Hammurabi's code and the laws found in the Old Testament, particularly in the Book of Exodus. Both feature if-then formulations and cover similar topics like theft, assault, and property damage. The eye for an eye principle is famously repeated in the Bible. This doesn't necessarily mean one copied the other directly. It is more likely that both legal systems emerged from a shared legal tradition that was common across the ancient Near East. Hammurabi's code is simply the earliest and most complete example we have of this tradition. It set a precedent. The idea that a ruler's authority is tied to upholding justice and that laws should be standardized and publicly known was revolutionary. So, how did the code itself survive? For centuries after the fall of Babylon, the stele was lost to history. It wasn't until 1901 that a team of French archaeologists rediscovered it in Susa, in modern-day Iran. It had been taken there as spoils of war by an Elamite king in the 12th century BC. The discovery was an earth-shattering event. Here was a nearly 4,000-year-old legal system, preserved in stone. Today, the original stele stands in the Louvre Museum in Paris, where millions of visitors come to see it every year. It's a physical testament to humanity's long and ongoing quest for justice. But its legacy isn't confined to a museum. Think about the fundamental principles it introduced. The idea that laws should be written down and accessible to everyone is the basis of our constitutional law. The principle of using evidence to decide a case is the foundation of our entire judicial process. Minimum wage laws. Hammurabi had regulations setting the daily wages for different laborers. The code dealt with breach of contract, liability for faulty construction, and even agricultural malpractice. If a farmer neglected to maintain his irrigation ditches and flooded his neighbor's field, he was legally required to compensate his neighbor for the lost crops. These are issues that our courts still deal with today, nearly 4 millennia later. The Code of Hammurabi also represents a monumental shift in how we view the role of government. Before Hammurabi, kings were primarily seen as military leaders and religious figureheads. Hammurabi positioned himself as a shepherd to his people, responsible for their welfare and for ensuring justice in the land. In the prologue to the Code, he declares his purpose is to make justice prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, that the strong may not oppress the weak. This was a profound new vision for governance, one where the state has a duty to protect its citizens through the rule of law. This concept has echoed through the ages and is a core tenet of modern democratic societies. Of course, we must also acknowledge its flaws. The Code's reliance on social status for punishment is something our legal systems have rightly rejected. Many of its punishments are, by our standards, incredibly cruel. It also had a very patriarchal view of society, with laws that heavily favored men over women. But we shouldn't judge it solely by 21st century values. Instead, we should see it as a product of its time and a remarkable leap forward for its time. It was a first draft of justice, an audacious attempt to create order out of chaos and establish a society based on predictable rules rather than the whims of the powerful. In the end, the true legacy of Hammurabi's Code isn't any single law, but the very idea of law itself. It's the declaration that a society can and should be governed by a clear, consistent, and public set of rules. It represents the moment humanity decided that justice was too important to be left to chance. Every time you sign a contract, every time a court weighs evidence, every time we debate what is fair and just, we are walking on a path that was first paved in ancient Babylon. The stone pillar may be in a museum, but the principles it represents are all around us, woven into the very fabric of our civilization. It is a powerful reminder that our search for justice is one of the oldest and most noble human endeavors. Segment 8 were common misconceptions and modern perspectives since its modern rediscovery. The Code of Hammurabi has often been presented through simplified descriptions that obscure its historical function and administrative context. This segment examines how such interpretations emerged, what the surviving evidence supports, and how modern scholarship approaches the code through archaeological, linguistic, and comparative analysis. One recurring misconception presents the code as the first formal legal system in recorded history. While it is among the most extensive early law collections preserved, it was produced within an already established Mesopotamian legal tradition. Written laws, court procedures, and contractual enforcement mechanisms were in operation centuries before its inscription. Legal texts from Sumerian city-states demonstrate that formalized law existed by the late 3rd millennium year BC. The Code of Hammurabi, dated to approximately 2100 year BC, contains provisions regulating theft, bodily injury, and compensation. Other collections, including the Laws of Ashnunna, dated to the early 2nd millennium year BC, address property disputes, price regulation, and defined social obligations. These earlier law collections indicate continuity rather than novelty. The Code of Hammurabi did not introduce written law to Mesopotamia but compiled, standardized, and publicly displayed an existing legal framework. Its historical significance rests in its scope, internal organization, and state-sponsored presentation rather than chronological precedence. Another frequent misunderstanding centers on the expression commonly summarized as an eye for an eye. This phrase is often treated as the governing principle of the entire code. In the surviving text, equivalent retaliation appears only in specific provisions and is applied selectively across defined social categories. Many legal cases prescribe monetary compensation or restitution rather than physical punishment. Injuries, property damage, and professional liability are commonly resolved through fixed payments, calibrated according to legally defined status groups. These provisions reflect administrative consistency rather than generalized retaliation. The code distinguishes among free citizens, dependents, and enslaved persons, assigning different legal outcomes for identical offenses. This differentiation corresponds to the stratified structure of Babylonian society. The text records prescribed outcomes rather than universal legal standards. Popular summaries frequently isolate the most severe penalties while omitting the majority of regulations. More than half of the preserved laws concern agriculture, land tenancy, commercial exchange, labor obligations, inheritance, and contractual liability. These sections document mechanisms for managing an urbanized and economically complex state. Another misconception assumes that the code functioned as a binding statute book applied uniformly in judicial proceedings. Archaeological evidence from legal tablets indicates that judges did not routinely cite the code when issuing verdicts. Legal decisions were instead based on local precedent, sworn testimony, administrative procedure, and royal authority. The stele itself appears to have functioned primarily as a public declaration of royal justice rather than a procedural manual. Its monumental scale and placement within a temple precinct support this interpretation. The text communicates authority, order, and divine sanction rather than operational courtroom instruction. Modern scholarship interprets the code as both legal and declarative in function. Its prologue and epilogue describe the king's role in maintaining justice, regulating social order, and protecting specified groups. These sections frame the laws without detailing enforcement mechanisms. The attribution of the laws to divine authority is another frequent source of misinterpretation. The code states that the laws were presented by a deity associated with justice. This reflects a conventional form of royal legitimation rather than direct theological authorship in a modern sense. Mesopotamian rulers regularly associated governance with divine mandate. Law was represented as aligned with cosmic order. This association reinforced centralized authority and compliance without requiring theological interpretation of individual provisions. Another assumption treats the code as an expression of a comprehensive moral philosophy. The laws do not articulate ethical principles, personal motivations, or internal states. Each provision specifies observable actions and corresponding outcomes only. The absence of motive-based evaluation distinguishes the code from later legal traditions that incorporate intent or mitigate circumstances. Babylonian legal practice prioritized externally verifiable actions and standardized penalties, facilitating adjudication within existing administrative constraints. Modern interpretations sometimes project contemporary legal concepts onto the code, including equality before the law or individual legal rights. These concepts did not operate in the same form in ancient Mesopotamia. Law functioned primarily to regulate hierarchy, exchange, and administrative stability. When examined within its original administrative environment, apparent inconsistencies correspond to structured social differentiation rather than irregular application. The code reflects systemic organization rather than abstract legal philosophy. Another misconception concerns the permanence of the laws. There is no evidence that the code was immutable. Mesopotamian legal systems evolved through royal edicts, judicial precedent, and customary practice. The code represents a formalized record associated with a specific reign. Later law collections, including Assyrian and Hittite examples, display significant variation in penalties, categories, and structure. This variation indicates the absence of a single, continuous Mesopotamian legal standard across regions and periods. The physical history of the stele has also influenced modern interpretation. Discovered in Susa, far from Babylon, the monument had been relocated centuries after its inscription. Its survival resulted from secondary reuse rather than sustained legal function. This relocation suggests that the stele operated as a symbolic object rather than an active judicial reference. Its preservation enabled modern study of a text that might otherwise have been lost. Contemporary analysis relies heavily on philological precision. The Akkadian language of the code employs technical legal terminology that does not consistently correspond to modern legal vocabulary. Early translations introduced interpretive bias by emphasizing severity or moral framing. Subsequent revisions have clarified terminology and corrected earlier assumptions. These refinements reveal a procedural and administrative register more consistent with the text's internal structure. Comparative studies situate the code within a broader Near Eastern legal tradition. Shared formats and legal conventions across regions indicate common administrative practices rather than isolated development. Divergences reflect localized priorities and governance models. Within this framework, the code is treated as one preserved instance of legal codification rather than a singular origin point. Its prominence results from its survival and completeness rather than direct institutional transmission in modern education and media. The code is often reduced to symbolic shorthand for ancient law. While this approach simplifies reference, it limits contextual accuracy. Scholarly methodology emphasizes evidence-based interpretation and contextual restraint. Current academic consensus identifies the code as a composite artifact, simultaneously legal, administrative, and declarative. These functions can be distinguished without attributing motive or evaluative intent. The code's visibility in modern discourse reflects material preservation rather than exclusive historical influence. Its endurance results from inscription, relocation, and rediscovery rather than continuous application. Recognizing this distinction allows the code to be examined as a historical document rather than a moral exemplar. Its evidentiary value lies in what it records about governance, economy, and social organization in early Babylonian society. Through ongoing refinement of translation and contextual analysis, scholarship continues to clarify interpretation without altering the evidence. This approach maintains historical accuracy while improving analytical precision. Within this analytical framework, the Code of Hammurabi is neither a singular origin nor an anomaly. It represents a documented instance of legal codification within a literate, hierarchical, and administratively structured society of the early second millennium year BC. This perspective situates the code within its archaeological and institutional context, restoring its function as an artifact of governance rather than legend, and grounding interpretation entirely in recorded history. The Code of Hammurabi occupies a documented position within the recorded history of early complex societies. Its significance derives from the information it preserves regarding governance, administration, and social regulation in Mesopotamia during the early second millennium BC. Issued during the reign of Hammurabi of Babylon, dated approximately 1790 to 1750 BC, the code represents a formal articulation of legal provisions within a centralized territorial state. The text records a compiled body of legal regulations applied across a population governed by a single political authority. The code documents law as an institutional mechanism. Each provision specifies a defined action and a corresponding outcome. The text does not articulate abstract principles or ethical reasoning. It records enforceable consequences within a structured social framework. This format demonstrates the use of written codification within early state administration. Legal provisions are presented in standardized form, establishing consistent outcomes for specified actions across different locations within the state. The survival of the code provides material evidence for this administrative practice. Many Mesopotamian legal systems are known through fragmentary tablets or indirect references. The Hammurabi stele preserves an extensive and continuous legal corpus associated with a single reign. Its physical form contributes to its historical documentation. Carved into basalt and inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, the stele was constructed for long-term preservation and public display. The scale and material reflect the resources available to the Babylonian state at the time of its production. The placement of the stele within a temple precinct indicates its public and institutional setting. The text associates royal authority with divine sanction without describing enforcement procedures or judicial processes. The code also records the structure of Babylonian society. Legal distinctions among free persons, dependents, and enslaved individuals appear consistently across multiple provisions. These distinctions are applied systematically throughout the text. Economic activity occupies a significant portion of the code. Regulations addressing land tenancy, irrigation maintenance, commercial exchange, and contractual obligations document recurring administrative concerns within an agrarian and mercantile economy. These provisions establish fixed penalties and compensation amounts. Outcomes are standardized rather than negotiated, indicating formal responses to common disputes related to production and trade. Family law provisions document household arrangements and inheritance procedures, marriage agreements, dowries, divorce terms, and succession rules are defined in measurable legal terms. These provisions regulate property transmission within established family structures. Labor relations are also addressed. The code specifies obligations, wages, and penalties associated with workers, supervisors, and employers. These provisions correspond to organized labor activities linked to agriculture and construction. Professional liability appears in multiple sections. Builders, physicians, and merchants are subject to defined consequences based on the results of their work. Penalties are assigned according to observable outcomes rather than stated intention. Throughout the text, legal responsibility is determined by action and result. The code does not reference motive or internal deliberation. Liability is defined through externally verifiable conditions. This structure reflects adjudication based on testimony, contracts, and physical evidence. Judicial decisions rely on documented actions rather than interpretive assessment. The relationship between the code and later legal traditions requires careful distinction. While other Near Eastern law collections share structural features, no evidence demonstrates direct legal transmission or continuous authority across regions or centuries. Assyrian, Hittite, and other regional legal texts differ in terminology, penalties, and scope. These differences indicate separate compilations developed within comparable administrative environments. The code's relevance to later legal study is indirect. Its preservation enables modern examination of early legal codification, but it did not function as a binding legal source beyond its historical context. The stele was rediscovered in 1901 CE at Susa, removed from its original Babylonian location. The relocation occurred centuries after the code's inscription. This displacement preserved the monument while ending any administrative function it previously held. Its continued existence reflects later reuse rather than institutional continuity. Modern analysis has been shaped by archaeological excavation and philological study. Advances in translation and contextual comparison have clarified the formal and administrative nature of the text. Earlier interpretations emphasize severity or moral evaluation. Subsequent research situates the code within its documented economic, social, and political framework. Comparative examination shows that the code aligns with broader Mesopotamian legal conventions. Its structure, terminology, and case-based organization correspond to earlier and contemporary legal records. This correspondence allows the code to be analyzed as a representative legal artifact. It documents one instance of legal codification within established administrative practice. The code's continued presence in education and public reference reflects its textual completeness. Few ancient legal compilations survive in comparable condition. This prominence has sometimes led to symbolic representation detached from administrative contexts. The text itself records formal declarations rather than interpretive commentary. The code does not encompass all legal activity within Babylonian society. It does not record daily court proceedings or local variation. Instead, it presents an official legal framework associated with royal authority. It records declared legal outcomes rather than comprehensive judicial practice. This distinction defines the code's evidentiary value. It documents state-level legal articulation rather than total legal behavior. The text illustrates how written law functioned within centralized governance. Legal codification formed part of administrative regulation and social organization. Public inscription supported uniform reference across a diverse population. Standardized provisions reduced variation in formal legal outcomes. Comparable systems appear across early complex societies. Written law is associated with administrative centralization and record-based governance. The Hammurabi Code constitutes one documented example of this process. Its preservation allows direct examination of early legal administration. The text also records the relationship between literacy and institutional authority. Legal codification required trained scribes, and standardized language, access to legal knowledge was mediated through administrative structures. Interpretation and application were institutionally controlled. The code records differentiated legal treatment based on social status. Provisions apply variably according to defined categories. Uniform legal equality is not documented within the text. Law operates as a regulatory instrument within hierarchical society. Evaluation of the code requires historical contextualization. Its provisions correspond to the administrative conditions of early 2nd millennium BC Babylon. Within this framework, the code functions as a primary historical source. It records mechanisms of governance through written law. Its continued scholarly relevance results from preservation and completeness. These characteristics support sustained comparative analysis. The code contributes data to the study of ancient economy, social organization, and state formation. It records regulated outcomes rather than normative theory. Its significance lies in documentation. The text preserves operational aspects of law within a specific historical setting. This documentation situates the stele within broader patterns of early governance. It provides material evidence rather than symbolic abstraction. The Code of Hammurabi does not represent the origin of law, nor does it define universal justice. It records one preserved legal framework from early Babylonian administration. Its historical importance rests on the information it conveys. Examined within context, it presents a detailed record of legal structure within a centralized, literate state of the early 2nd millennium BC. In this capacity, the code remains a foundational source for understanding early governance. Its study contributes to documented knowledge of the interaction between law, economy, and authority in the ancient world.